Leaving home and hitting the road is probably one of the single most enjoyable things I think shooters can do. Because it's outside of being on assignment, it's outside of pressure. You're just going out and you're taking pictures of things that you want to photograph. And of course, to maximize that, you've got to be prepared. And the research you do, the proper packing. I love the fact that I can just go in my own vehicle. I can bring some food with me. I never have to go into town to get lunch because I'm self-contained with all of my equipment, all of my visual options, all of my crackers and nuts and carrots, and go out and shoot. And as long as I've done the research, I know where things are happening and what's going to be going on at certain times of the day. The variations with things like weather, which we can't control, all we can do is look at it and say, okay, well, geez, if I'm getting a great storm, this might be a good time to shoot black and white, or this might be a time to shoot time lapse. You can't control that. You can only plan as best as you can and be flexible when you go out. So that barrage of equipment that I can bring here and change my attitude as nature dictates itself is a really great way to travel. And coming to places like Custer in South Dakota, Yosemite in California, or the African Serengeti, hitting the road and taking pictures is always a blast. Well, I think if anybody asked me what are my two favorite words in the world, it's road trip. And let's face it, for photographers, taking a road trip, going out and finding images is always the most exciting thing that we do. We create, we go places, we see new things, we come back with new images, whether we're visiting places that we're familiar with or new places. It's the way to go. But to do this and to do it effectively and to maximize the time and the money that you spend going out, especially if you're not on assignment, you've got to do your research, you've got to do your homework, you have to have a few questions answered before you go so you can maximize whatever happens when you're out. Because let's face it, it might rain, you may have cloudy weather. There's usually 6 hours of every day where the light isn't good, so you spend that time traveling from point A to point B, so you're at the places you want to be at A and B. So all of these things come into play when you're trying to plan a road trip. I tend to do my research about where I'm going to go and the season that I'm going to go there. And something I remember hearing here recently is that people from all over the world go to Yosemite in the spring for about a 5-day period of time to go there, because it's the only time that the sun lines up to hit Bridal Veil Falls and lights up the falls from behind. That's the kind of planning you're looking to get when you take a trip, if at all possible. And whether you're going to the Everglades, whether you're going to any national park of the country, Alaska, whatever, if you do a little bit of homework, you can figure out what's the best time to go there. Right now, I'm on a little road trip out into the Dakotas, where we've got 7 national parks, national monuments, national grasslands, all combined in a very tight area in the western, southwestern side of South Dakota. So it's a gold mine here. Everything from wildlife to landscapes to storms. So it's a good place to go. I like to come in the first week of May, kind of in that window, because the kids aren't out of school yet. The RVs aren't out cruising around. I can go to almost any vista here, and if I see 2 people, that's a lot of people. So I have it to myself. Some of the things that haven't quite happened yet, the blast of July wildflowers aren't here yet, but there's always going to be a compromise any place you go at any time. So you just kind of pick your medicine and go with it as you can. So I look at the maps, I kind of figure out places where they're going to be. One of your greatest resources, if you have to figure out, like tomorrow we're planning on being at Mount Rushmore. And when you think about places like Mount Rushmore, again, we're dealing with weather, but if you're looking for idyllic conditions, which is what you start with, the best time to be there is from 6 in the morning till 10 in the morning. And the best time to be there is in the wintertime, because the sun is at an angle where it illuminates all of the faces without one being in shade. But we're not here in the wintertime, so we're going to still go in the early morning and try to get that light because it faces southeast. If we went there in the afternoon and we didn't do our research, we're getting at Mount Rushmore at the wrong time. We've wasted time, we've wasted money, and we have to come back another time. So all of these things play into making a successful road trip. And the more you can plan, the more you can have a little bit of luck, but most importantly, doing the road trip, you'll come away with some good pictures. All right, you're out boogieing around and you're traveling on your photo trips. I think every photographer is always kind of on the clock, so to speak. We're always working, whether it's on your way to grandma's house for Thanksgiving dinner or you're on your way to a photo shoot. We're always looking and always seeing things, and I think that's a good, healthy attitude to have, and carry that attitude into, don't forget to be spontaneous. Don't pass up something that you see that potentially could be a shot just because you're in a hurry to get someplace else. So when you're planning stages on your travel trips, make sure that you're planning in time to give yourself a little extra elbow room to stop and grab some shots now and then. And things just will happen right on the side of the road, or a wonderful landscape, or a storm that rolls by and you've got 30 minutes to stop and shoot it. Get those things. They're really worth getting, and just be prepared and think out of the box. I love having the options of being able to shoot a number of different things a number of different ways when I'm out, because when I come back, my goodness, I have a wonderful collection of images that tell a variety of stories, almost in a variety of mediums: black and white, color, night, in the morning, good light, bad light. Don't bypass anything. If it talks to you, go visit it and take a shot. And just have fun while you're out there. And I guess the most important thing, listen to the messages. Something's barking out at you, by golly, there's a reason for that. You need to stop and shoot it. One of the great things about road tripping, personally, when you're going on a trip where you're just kind of bouncing around and you can take your own vehicle, as opposed to being on assignment where it's rental vehicle, it's hotel, it's van, it's caravan. I love it when I can go out on my own kind of a shoot and I can pack the way I want to pack and bring the kind of equipment that I need to bring. So I've got a little bit of everything, and I've got a safe in the back of the vehicle so I can store my equipment safely when I'm on a trailhead. I bring coolers so I can pack food. I usually have tortillas and peanut butter and jelly so I can slap something together. So no matter where I am, if I need to eat, I can eat. I stuff in the safe everything from flashlights, filters, tripods, extra bodies, pinhole cameras, instruction manuals, all the stuff, including the kitchen sink. And, I love to be able to do that. And up on top in my carrier, I've got my tent, my sleeping bag, extra jackets, all the things that you need to be able to go out and do it. But I think the most important part of it is that when you go places, it's not uncommon for photographers to have a particular concept in mind when they go and they shoot. That's okay. But the key, I think, to being successful and coming back with a wide variety of imagery is being flexible. And so, I tend to go on these things not only thinking in terms of color, but there are situations that I get into that I completely change gears and I'm thinking totally about black and white. Or there are places that I go to and I'm thinking about the iPhone, grabbing a shot with the iPhone of all things. But then there's shots where I want to do pinhole, or I want to do some filter variation photography. And basically, as I've traveled, I've got all of that with me so I can keep those concepts together. And so just don't mold yourself into something that says, I'm only going to shoot this, or if I don't see that, I'm going to stop shooting. I'm willing to bet if you change gears and you look at things differently when you're out and you come prepared for it on your road trips, it enables you to be able to capture things in almost any condition at any time and bring a wide variety of images home that cover the whole spectrum of the medium. And it's tough to do. It's a real distance to be able to change gears from color to black and white, but oftentimes, especially in landscape, it dictates itself for you. You just have to be prepared to be able to capture it. And if you do, you're going to have a good trip. You're going to come back with some new images, and that kind of opens the vault in your head to being able to see that on your next road trip. So go prepared, bring what you need, and have fun. One common denominator in landscape, for the most part, is light. It's always light, isn't it? And it can be bad light, which is dramatic light. It can be really beautiful, crisp, clear light, which defines our landscape. Finding it and being in the right place at the right time is always what we aim to be, but things change, and sometimes we don't get what we want, so we adjust. And I tend to have always thought of landscape as this, but when the light gets bad, I do this. I come in tight and I start shooting details, because that's still landscape. I'm just trying to accomplish something that lets my audience know that I'm someplace unique and that there is something stunningly beautiful here, and I want to capture it and share that with you. It could be wildflowers, it could be textures, it could be light, it could be all of these things combined. But if it's not, you find the little things, the little nuances that bring a landscape image to life and present that to your audience and communicate. what am I trying to say? And if you can do that with your lens, with your combinations of light, situations, environment, you've got a good photograph. All right, we've got a possibly colorful, unique spot here that's landscape that's going to be detail. And the only way I'm going to get detail in this particular location is I've got to get on the long lenses so I can pick it apart. The sun still hasn't come out and shown its wonderful face, and so we're having to go details. And in doing so, I've got to go long. So I've got a 600 to 300, and we're going to find out which one works here. And I'm just going to go over here and I'm going to scan the landscape and find what I can't see to make it really come alive. So let's check it out. All right, well, let's see what we've got out on this ridge. Wow, this is actually pretty cool here. Look at this. I love when they do this. This elevated platform. I'm above the grasses, but the designs. I mean, this is kind of a strange, colorful, monochromatic all at the same time, but pretty cool. Let's hope the magic continues. All right, so we've made it to our lookout point. Whether or not we'll shoot from this exact spot, I don't know, but they tend to put these things in places where there's something cool. So we'll start here and move along. But the first thing I've got to do here, if I'm going to shoot with these long lenses, my traditional tripod head, which is a favorite of many people, because I actually bought this from Joseph Daguerre back in the 1800s. It's been around forever, and the reason it's been around forever is that it's well made. But it's not going to work for this. I don't want a ball head type. I want to use a tripod head that's known as a Wimberley design. So your big glasses literally become perfectly balanced, and they just float on top of your tripod and make it very, very easy to work with long lenses. Really good for wildlife, really good for sports. And in this case, even though I'm shooting a still landscape, it's going to make maneuvering around the big glass much easier for me. It's a really wonderful design because you can center your big glass right on this thing with your camera, and you can move this monster glass with just one finger. It's a fantastic design. There's a couple of them out there now. This one is a Wimberley design. And again, one of these tripod heads that's well made, and I've had it for, gosh, at least 15, 20 years already. So let's get a camera on there, start poking around and see what we can come up with. My 600 here, you're going to notice, for you techno people, is that this is an old lens, and I got this lens a long time ago when I was working on a project where I was doing a book on buffalo. And of course it's outdated, but it still works with my D3. It's not autofocus, it's not automatic, but it's so dang sharp I can't let her go. So I'm using it until I have to use something else. No sense, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So, okay, let's look around. Looks like right over there. Gonna be our hot spot. All right, this is fabulous. I think we found a solution to our problems here with this kind of flat light. I have this very large landscape. I'm using a very long lens to isolate some of these wonderful reddish, very detailed, high relief patterns that are in the Badlands. And so it's one of the things that we have to do. I'm using a long lens for this and it's going to work, but there's also considerations that you have to take into account when you're here. One, with a long lens means I've got to be very sensitive to camera movement. So on the tripod, of course, getting it on the sticks is going to be step number one in being able to recover that. The other is that if it's windy and the wind catches this lens, it's going to give me camera shake. And if I got camera shake, what do? Well, I've got to ramp up my shutter speed. But another problem exists here because with this long lens, remember there's an incredibly shallow depth of field. And in a landscape, particularly in this landscape, I've got rolling hills that are going back from each other. I need depth of field. So I've automatically taken my lens down to the smallest aperture, f/22 on this particular piece of glass. That means my shutter speed's gonna go down. So if I need to find that zone and watch my camera to make sure that there's no movement, and if there is a little bit movement, then I'm gonna have to ramp up my ISO to secure a fast enough shutter speed that eliminates any camera shake. The other step in doing that, of course, is I make sure that I don't touch the camera. If you don't have a cable release, you can use a self-timer, but I'll carry any number of different cable releases to use out here. So I don't touch the camera, again, preventing any kind of camera movement that's coming into it. So with this lens, I just scan the horizon. I found a couple of really unique kind of whale-back formations that are going over. And a wide angle lens, this whole scene would become flat. With this lens, I'm able to isolate it, find the unique spot. I'm going to, on this particular camera, I'm using what's known as active de-lighting. Flat light like this, you know, it's so flat, I would like to be able to boost contrast. Mother Nature's not giving it to me, so I can go into active de-lighting settings in my menu, and I've actually put it up on high, so it's gonna give me a little bit more punch and help define a little bit more of these ridges and these overlaps that I'm getting in the landscape and adding to that high relief texture that exists here. So we'll just have fun with this. We'll take a few shots. I'll scan the horizon, get some shots with the 6. Then after the 6, I'm gonna pull back a little bit more with a slightly less long lens, and I'll go with a 300 millimeter, and I'll start picking it apart again. But that's really all it takes, you know, so don't give up on bad light. You can actually find some good light, and this is a shot you probably wouldn't take as a landscape with a long lens if the sun were out. All right, so now I got the opportunity. I'm going to walk around, find some more gold and some more treasures, do a little bit more exploring with the 600, and then I'll switch off. I'll put the 300 on and look around some more. There's all kinds of cool things with this long lens. Yeah, look at that texture, man, oh man. The Badlands could look like Death Valley sometimes. All right, we've got our 300 switched off onto the Wimberley and on the sticks as well. And so now what we're doing is it's very simple. All I've done is gone from a very, very long lens where I'm shooting details of a massive landscape, and I'm using a 300, which is a fixed focus, and it's allowing me to pull back and show a little bit more real estate to my landscape. So I'm playing off the same tonal values and things that are happening here. I'm just adding to the detail shots by using a 300 as opposed to the 600. So it's this compression effect because of the waves. That's the reason I'm with long lenses as opposed to wide angles, which show detail in the foreground and then fall off in the background. I'm using a long lens to take these waves of landscape out here and compressing them together using the small aperture, shutter speeds conducive to that, dealing with the wind, all the normal things that I did with the 600, I'm doing with the 300. It's just giving me more real estate to shoot in the shot. So, sitting at lunch, it's high noon hour. It's a time when most photographers are using this time to travel between their landscaping shots because the sun is high. I mean, when the sun is high, for me in a place like the Badlands here and shooting landscapes, it's almost as offensive as no light at all because everything flattens out. This area needs contrast. But yet, off in the distance at lunch, I looked down the road and I saw an area where the road cuts through the Badlands, and the areas immediately to the each side of the road are brilliant green amongst all of this tan as the new grasses start to come to life. It looked like it could be a potential shot. So it's one of those kind of shots that it's in the distance. I had to be in a certain spot to get it. The closer I got to it, the worse it got. And that can happen with landscapes. You have to pick your spot on where it works. In fact, there's a good light on it right now. Let's just grab it. And so you take it and you get it while you can. And as I came up to this, I'm using a 300 millimeter to compress it. I'm using the tan grass in the foreground to try to throw it out of focus a little bit. So my eye goes to the most important part of my shot, and that's this curve in the road with the green. So it's an unusual landscape. It's kind of, I don't know, we call them grab shots, a shot that you get because something talked to you, and rather than refusing to talk back, you come down here and you get it. And so that's what it was. It's very simple. It's not a great shot, but it's nice eye candy. I like it. It's different for being in the Badlands and dealing with high noon. My gosh, if you can get a shot at high noon like this, you're having an okay day. But the cool thing about this is that this is an area rich in wildlife. A lot of birds. There's good mammals here. There's pronghorn, there's buffalo, there's coyotes. We've seen one coyote this morning. And I thought, well, with all the prairie dogs that I've heard, the coyotes make sense that they're out cruising around. But one of the things that's really cool about being out and being a photographer is that you can be on a mission to come get this shot that talked to you while you were sitting down and having lunch. And while I walked over here to get it, listening to these messages, as I stood here and finished my last shot, wildlife in its infinite way, oftentimes if it doesn't move and it's camouflaged in this kind of a setting, you don't know it's there. Well, I stayed in this particular spot for about 4 or 5 minutes while I'm getting my shot, and as I lifted my tripod to leave, a bird flew away. And I thought, well, he was 10 feet from me. And I thought, oh my gosh, he might be in a nest, because this is a big ground nesting area because there's no trees. So I walked over, and sure enough, there's a nest with about 8, 10 eggs in it. And so I didn't want to disturb the mother. She flew off. I quickly changed from a 300 to my 14 millimeter. I laid down in the grass, and I was instantly able to get a landscape photo of a detail of the prairie by taking a quick photograph of that nest, and in just a matter of seconds, I'm vominosed and I'm out of here so I don't disturb the nest. You got to be out here to do it. It's that old saying in photography, it's F8 and be there. When you're photographing wildlife, I was photographing this bison herd, and one of the coolest things is as we stopped and started getting shots of them, I immediately noticed that it's the first time I've seen it today, there's all these wild irises that are out and in bloom. Spectacular prairie color. So that's one of those things, just because I'm out here shooting wildlife doesn't mean that I'm going to stop shooting everything else that's exploding in color and life out here on the prairie. So be aware of that. Gosh, if you see bird eggs, you see wildflowers, we're here early in the spring, and we're hoping we're going to be able to get this stuff, but by golly, if you see it, make sure you get it. Don't leave home without it. Just driving down the road, how many times does it happen to photographers where you just see something? We're always working, but you see something and go, that's a cool shot. Well, I've learned over the years, pull off, take a look at it. This time, just driving down the road, I noticed a pond that was just like glass. It's a tiny little thing, but there's something about reflections that seems to be magnets for photographers. And I happened to see this one that had a little green patch with some bushes that were reflecting in this black water. And it had a neat look to it, so it's worth coming down and taking a peek at it. So I came down, looked at it, and white balance wasn't quite working. I had my white balance temperature set for something earlier. It was a Kelvin temperature to warm up a kind of a dull day. So I came back and noticed that it wasn't working well on my monitor, so I went back to auto. That wasn't working. So I said, well, I need to go to shade. So I ended up on shade setting to get the color temperature the way I wanted it for this particular scene. So I started taking some shots of it, started to work, and sure enough, as soon as it started to work, it started to sprinkle, so it ruined the reflection. Well, by golly, next thing I noticed, I looked off to the other side, and where the trees across the street are reflecting in the same pond, they're dark, they're black. And the rain started hitting it, and as opposed to where the sky was hitting the reflection, it was too white. The raindrops were really coming out in the area where the dark was. So I just trained my camera over on that, changed my white balance to incandescent, really underexposed the shot. So it's like little white rings that are hitting themselves on the black, but they're bluish in color, which gave it that kind of moody look. So here you are, you pull off the road looking for one thing, and you end up getting something else, and now the rain has stopped, and I'm not sure I'm gonna get what I want anyway, but I've enjoyed the few minutes that I'm down here. I think in the classic sense of landscape photography, we think wide. We think of an expansive landscape that's got a lot of juicy visual informational material all in the same spot that we want to capture in a single shot. This is a good spot for that. We've got some issues that we have to contend with, and there's ways that we can get around that. For the most part, this particular scene, I've got all these wonderful textures and what have you that are before me, and I want to capture those as well as the background. So number one, I got to go to f/22 because I want to have a great amount of depth of field as I go through this. And the other is that I've got a sky in front of me that's not all that great. And so if I keep that sky, all it's going to do is deter from my shot. So what do? You point your camera down, you eliminate the sky. I'm bringing the sky right to the horizon. So I'm still able to include the depth of this scene, but I'm not having to worry about polluting the scene with a sky that has nothing in it. Now that said, if I had tremendous clouds, storm clouds, finger clouds, cumulus clouds, then I'd look at the horizon and I'd ask myself, okay, which is most important here? And I kind of have to look at the horizon as a level. Where does the greatest amount of drama take place? Does it take place in the foreground, or now has the sky transferred it, and is it taking place in the sky? So it's a kind of a constant battle between those. And so in this case, the sky is washed out, it's white. I'm going to eliminate it. I'm going to bring it right to the horizon so it's gone. The other is with the depth of field, f/22, the other is my exposure. Right now, I'm kind of sitting in this area in the Badlands that is kind of this alkali wash. It's very white, but it's cracked, so there's a lot of texture. Ideally, about an hour from now, the sun would be perfect, but it's not bad now. I'm here now. I've got to get this now because we've got to move on. But my background is green. It's turning lush. Spring life is coming about. So I want to make sure I get that. So one of the ways I can do that without having to worry about a neutral density filter is that I can underexpose my entire scene. And by underexposing the scene, I make everything a little bit darker, which is going to make that a little bit greener. And if there's any issues with it later, I'll be able to take care of it. But for the most part, that's going to solve my problem. The light is even everywhere, but I'm going to knock this down a little bit more to make that contrast. These wonderful patterns in the mud wash are going to come out a lot more if it's a little bit darker. And that's how we're going to handle this shot. And it's a simple shot. I'm on a tripod because I'm shooting a lot of depth of field. I'm shooting at my slowest ISO. And so I'm still going to use my cable release. And that's kind of typical in landscapes because I don't want any chance of any movement, maximum depth, lots of clarity, and we'll just fire away. So this is one of the great things that happens in photography. And again, the concept of being available to be flexible. When we were here, the sky was terrible. And in the 10 minutes that we're here, the sky has changed dramatically. So now, as opposed to eliminating the sky, bringing my frame to the top of the horizon, now I'm actually pointing my wide angle lens up to the sky, and I'm changing it to get a vertical so I can still include the foreground, but now I got this dynamic sky. That quickly, your luck can change. Yeah, that's fantastic. So we're coming along, all of a sudden the sun's broke. Holy cow. Been waiting for this all day. And so the day is coming to go to a conclusion now, and so you get this wonderful magic. The light situations that we had earlier in the day required the use of putting the tripod out. We needed depth of field, using wide angles, looking down and seeing foreground and texture to kind of eliminate the bad skies and the bad light that we had. Here we've got a case now where the light is really bright, so I don't need my sticks. And the reason I don't need the sticks is that right now my scene, my landscape is in the distance. And so I'm using a semi-medium focal length telephoto lens to bring it in, but I can hand hold it. I don't need to require to get f/22. I can shoot comfortably at f/8 at a shutter speed that's comfortable for me to not have camera movement. Now, when you get a scene like this is a really wide view of the Badlands. And as is typical with some landscapes, not all that are perfectly set where the trees in the right spot, the rivers in the right spot, the mountains in the right spot, that kind of rule of thirds landscape composition that we're used to seeing everywhere. This one's different. It's kind of like the Grand Canyon. It's wide and it's spread out. So I can come in here and pick the most attractive spot and get my single shot of that, which is fine. But why not go ahead and take several shots of this? And the panoramic stitching is so good these days, as long as I'm steady and I move my camera evenly through it, I can get the whole scene. And so we're able to get a couple different things, a couple different approaches here to kind of give us a more dramatic landscape by, one, hand holding and shooting quickly with a medium focal length lens. The other is stitching it and putting it together. It's an easy way to do it. The light's gotten good for us. We're in good shape. Good way to get a good landscape shot quickly. Those key points too to remember about stitching is that I tend to overlap almost a half. I think you read around that overlap a third. If I'm hand holding it, I'll actually overlap a half of a frame. So I make sure that no matter what, I'm finding that the computer is going to be able to find those pixels and line them up perfectly for me as I go by. Remember again, don't do autofocus, don't do auto exposure. Everything needs to go manual if you decide that you're going to go ahead and do that pan, because if anything changes along your panel stitching, the computer's not going to be able to find those pixels and line them up. So manual focus, manual exposure, overlap by a half if you're hand holding it, bounce through, and bring in the whole panoramic for your landscape shot. What a fabulous day in the Badlands today. You know, the day started off with cloudy skies. For 10 seconds, she broke and was able to get this fabulous shot from above, looking down and seeing the Great Plains behind it. You know, you just love moments like that. But then the doors closed. And so when the doors closed on the light, we had to come up with other things. And you're going to see through this that we were able to find ways to photograph the Badlands in ways that are kind of out of the box, but they're effective. And you can still add drama. You can still think out of the box. And so take this journey. And when you take your road trips and you go on your photo shoots, remember, just come prepared, do your research, think about landscapes. And if anything else, I think look at the landscapes as diverse as your imagination can be. Don't look for the textbook quintessential landscape that's perfect. Obviously, you want to shoot those, but don't forget that things big and small identify landscape. And when you do that, you're going to come away with not only one landscape shot, but probably lots of landscape shots, which makes your trip more productive and more rewarding. When visiting historical landmarks anywhere in the world, these places are designed for people to come see because they have rewards and they are beautiful places to go. So when you go to photograph at those places, there's a lot of things that you want to take into consideration before you go. We're at Mount Rushmore right now, and one of the things that I wanted to make sure that I was aware of before I got here was how much equipment was I going to need to bring to get the shots that I wanted to take. I wanted to find out when the sun hits the monument in a way that is going to be the best photograph. In other words, half of the faces in shade won't work. So I wanted to be here at a time in the morning hours. She faces southeast, and so you want to be here in the morning. Those are things that I like to think about before I come. We're right at the base now of Rushmore. And one of the things that, I always try to think about when I come to places like this is how can I shoot this different than what's ever been done before? Now, that said, I want to remind you that I always shoot it the way everybody else has shot it before too, because I want to have that images too. This is a fabulous thing, and you know that what's going to happen is that going to say, do you have that image that everybody else has? And I want to have it. But at the same time, I want to present something different. I want to show it in a different way. So I came here prepared thinking that I was going to use the 600 so I could come to the faces and just shoot the faces and then stitch them together, so really tight. But I ran into a problem. The 600 is too tight, and this is a fixed focal length, so it's not a zoom. So what happens is Mount Rushmore starts with Washington up here, and then it transcends down and then comes back up. And so if I'm trying to do a tight pano, if I shoot George's face and I move over here, well, then I lose Teddy, and then I lose Abe. So I've had to rethink that. So what I'm going to do is I put on this kind of handy travel zoom lens, which is a 300 millimeter for me. And so I'm going to shoot this as a 300, and that's going to allow me to have pulled back a little bit, and only 2 frames are going to give me my panoramic. It isn't going to be 3 stitches, 4 stitches. I'm still pretty tight, but it's allowed me to pull back enough now to where I do one shot and then another shot. I'll be able to stitch those together and still get that dip that you see in the monument, and still have a shot that's different than the shots of showing the talus field that's falling down from the carvings. And I'm just getting a little different shot than the typical iconic image that we have. And that's kind of the goal here, is to come here, get the iconic shot, and then get as many different perspectives as you possibly can. Now remember, with the panoramic, take it off of autofocus, take it off of auto exposure, because when I do those 2 shots, and I'm gonna hand hold this because the software is good enough now to where I can get it, and it's only 2 shots. I'm going to overlap them a half, but autofocus, auto manual are off, so nothing is changing between the 2 exposures. 2 exposures, I'm good to go, and I've got a different shot of Mount Rushmore. It's that simple. When you come to these historical landmarks, oftentimes there's alternative views that aren't necessarily visible to us. So talking to rangers, talking to people that work here, they know every square inch of these places. And so you tell them what you're looking for, and oftentimes they can steer you to the spot that the general public doesn't have either the time or the inclination to go to. Photographers do. And so just communicate, talk, let people know, those who know the place. And oftentimes they'll put you in a place that you get a view that nobody else has. This is a great one here. Look at that, holy smokes. What a great view. There's George right there. Oh, I love it. George, he's right there. I'm just driving by, and in my rearview mirror, I see George in the rearview mirror saying, "Stop, stop." And there he is. What a great view. Not even near the iconic image of the monument yet, but there's George in a slice of the rock. I love this. It's these abstract views that we get of national monuments that are so different than the ones that we see on the backs of license plates, on the cover of magazines, yet offer a unique perspective. I like it because it also includes the geology. There's no crowds, there's no people, there's no signs, all of these things, but yet we've got a slice of the national monument right there in a unique perspective. It's a great way, and I'm very lucky that I was able to see that. I've seen places that you can pull off and stop, but I hadn't seen it before, and it's kind of a hidden spot. If you don't look for it, you're not lucky enough to see it, or there aren't crowds piling here getting shots of it. They're the kind of things that you might miss. But by golly, lucky enough to see it, and the light's in a good spot. I'm going to spend a few minutes here getting some shots of this, so we'll see what happens. All right, let's see what we can get. This is such a cool spot here. And we got blue sky now is rolling in. Oh, look at that, doggone it, I missed him. See if I can get him. No, he went by. The bird just went by right over George's head. See, this is fantastic. The way the rocks work, from that perspective on that side of the street, the sky was more opened up like this. As I moved across the street, the rocks in the foreground and the rocks in the background have done this. And it's almost as if George Washington's face now is kind of getting abutted up against the rocks closest to me. It completely changes the dynamic of the shot. And what's great about this is I can shoot this as a horizontal, I can shoot this as a strong vertical. If I'm thinking in terms of how the end use is going to be, like in a magazine story, for example, a strong vertical here, George can be at the far right, and then I've got all of the geology and these great rock formations on the left, which are darker than George. An editor can look at this and say, let's just drop half our story in right there, and then George on a horizontal spread becomes a full page on the right. So you're not losing the oomph, the status, the scale of the monument by diminishing it by having it as a horizontal and not up close. So I'm able to include a lot of things. Blue skies moving in, I'll be able to shoot higher verticals, George at the bottom, George at the top, George at the side. Great opportunities like this, just simply by moving 50 feet one direction, 50 feet the other direction, moving back, moving forward. I'll leave here with 20 different options from the same location. This is where photography is just fun to do. Fantastic, fantastic. Any number of perspectives, any number of individual visions can help bring something like this home in a way that's different than the way you see it on a license plate or in every magazine cover that you've ever seen on the monument. So have fun, go out there and look for that unique perspective, be prepared, and you'll have a great shoot. You know, portraits of wildlife are kind of one of the mainstay ingredients of getting great shots of animals, no matter where you are in the world. And a portrait is very different than a shot of a herd going across the Serengeti or a herd of buffalo going across the prairie. A portrait is kind of that detail step, that one that brings us in and gives an identification of a species in a detailed fashion. We get a chance to see their eyes. We get a chance to see the color of their fur and the texture of their fur. And perhaps in the case of bison, like where we are here today, half of the prairie that they're dragging around on their coat. That's all information. It isn't necessarily ugly. It's information. It's part of the portrait. And like shooting family portraits, the dynamics that take place with the photographer and its subject, whether it be your kids, your grandparents, your boyfriend, girlfriend, or an animal, some of the same practices that we incorporate to get a successful shot work both ways. I have a few things that I typically kind of lean towards when I'm taking portraits. One is I like to use a long lens. And I like to use a longer lens, not a 600, not a 300, but even an 80 to 200, because I like to be able to use that compression to allow my background to drop out of focus. So it enables me to bring my portrait isolated from any background, any chaotic, erratic information visually that's behind it, and it separates it. So boom, my eye goes right there. The other is I tend to like to be able to shoot most of my portraits, especially with wildlife, from a lower perspective. I like that angle of looking down, looking up. I think it adds a certain prominence and stability and strength to the animal. And then coming in tight. And the other is expression. You know, if you think about those photographs when you're taking family pictures and everybody kind of crunches together and they all stand stiff like this, they make some incredibly boring pictures. But if people are relaxed and you're telling a joke or you're pointing fingers at somebody and they're pushing each other, then they stop, it's a very natural thing. Wildlife is no different. Look for something that brings out a little bit of their personality, whether it be if they're standing there grazing and they reach down and they grab a mouthful of grass and then they stand up and they're chewing it. There's your portrait. The portrait doesn't have to be clean, it just has to be informational. And it has to be something about that species that really brings it home and separates it from being that portrait of a cow in the middle of a field. When you incorporate these things, you'll start finding out that you become a better photographer and looking for those nuances and getting better portraits, but you're able to bring home that species and share that information with friends, families, and editors. We got really lucky this morning in Custer State Park here on our wildlife loop road, which to me is as close as you can get to having an African safari in the middle of the North American continent here in South Dakota. Some pronghorn antelope, which is the fastest land animal in North America, was just kind of hanging out here on the side of the road. A lot of times what I'll do is I'll roll the window down first and try to give a couple of shots, because a lot of times the animals in places like this are acclimated to car traffic. And so I'll try to grab a couple of shots if I can from the car first. And then if they seem comfortable, I'll get out of the car and then I can get to my other glass. In taking these shots, they're just grazing, and then they stopped and they rested. And you think, well, what kind of a shot can I get? Because wildlife shooting isn't about taking pictures of just cows standing there. It's pretty boring. So you try to find ways to make it more interesting if that is kind of the mentality of the wildlife that you're photographing at that time. So one of my favorite tricks is to get down low, and then I'm trying to look at the animal in a way that I can see something that's just not the normal straight portrait that you might see, for example, in an encyclopedia. Those get pretty boring, pretty static after a while. So one of the things you'll notice in one of these shots that I just got, the herd's kind of moved away from us now, so we're kind of taking a break here, is I'll get down on the ground and I'll actually use the ground, throw the beanbag on the ground. I'll use the ground as kind of a buffer zone. So there was one pronghorn who was sitting down, his back to me, and so all my shot is the back of his neck and his ears, and the ground has softened that. So I'm giving the illusion photographically almost as a predator might be sneaking up on the animal. So we've taken a very docile scene and we've added a visual element to it that makes it more compelling. The same is true when animals are walking. If a herd like this pronghorn, as they were walking by, if they're like this, they tend to blend in together, or they get like this and their heads become back to back, and it's kind of confusing. If you can just hold on and wait and hope that they'll do that, to where their heads separate and they do this, you get a much more interesting shot. And you can see that I was able to get that in this last sequence. So you get what you can while you're here, you make it happen. The herd got up, moved away. Now we're gonna move on and do the same thing. Here in Custer State Park in South Dakota, there's a wonderful opportunity with all of the abundance of wildlife that's on this wildlife loop road. There's a particular set of wildlife that exists here, the wild burros. And the wild burros, even though they're wild and they're free-range animals, they have become habituated to the traffic that goes down the road, and people have been feeding them forever and ever. So it's a unique opportunity to get a great wildlife shot in a place where the animals are still wild, but yet they have become habituated to people. And so if you hang out here long enough, every time a car comes by, they're feeding them. Now that's not a practice, I'm sure that's condoned by the Park Service here, but at the same time, it's a practice that's been going on for as long as I've been coming out here. And it's a good place to come get shots. We are really lucky today because we are here at a time when some of the burro calves have been born within the last day or two. So they're still walking like they've had too much to drink. Their legs haven't gotten a hold of them yet. And it's a fun place to come get the portraits, get the interaction between tourists and wildlife. They're wild animals, they're not caged animals, they're not fenced in animals. It's just a great place to come here and get wonderful shots of something that normally you would have to work very hard to get. You would have to have blinds and so on and so forth. Here, they're right here on the road, and if you just practice the normal courtesies that you do of people, don't get too close, don't spook the animals, stay back, get that information of what the animal and their interaction with people, you walk away with a really unique photograph. These burros now are nursing, and I've kind of chosen a spot on the opposite side where this road is. There's a cattle grate, so I know they won't cross. They're not going to come step on these, so I've kind of got this, this force field in between us now that's allowing me to get shots of them unobstructed, not have to worry about it. And there's some cars coming, and with any luck, these cars will stop, and they're familiar with kind of the scenario here, and they'll feed them, and then we'll get shots of them feeding the burros, which always makes fun shots. But this nursing shot right now is just quite lovely. Yeah, he's just a cute little guy. Well, it's a nice light now. So I've got, oh, this fantastic backlight right now where I've got a baby bison that was nuzzling her mom. Oh, now she's moved on, but man, we got that one. That was a fabulous shot. And the backlight is just gorgeous, just gorgeous. You're seeing a dark bison, top of the belly, bottom of the belly, top of the back, all backlit, so it's defining the animal. I can still overexpose it to bring the darkness out, but man, the babies, the calves and their moms are just coming right up with incredible backlight. And we're close enough, they're not at all bothered by us right now. I'm gonna move to get another guy up on the hill, he's backlit. I'll be back. Right now on top of the hill, we've got a mom bison and her calf standing on top of a ridge with a dark forest behind them backlit. So there's an even better separation because the dark background of the pine trees, and they're in this open field, the sun coming down really lends itself to just some absolutely incredible light. It's that great thing about going out in a storm thinking, geez, it doesn't look like even a good storm. Next thing you know, something happens and it breaks. And it's there. That's that old saying in photography, it's F8 and be there. You can't win if you don't enter. You're not going to get great pictures in places like this unless you go out and shoot. And look at that, there it is, just lined up like a train, shot after shot after shot. So now I've just kind of changed my position a little bit so it's not quite extreme backlight. I've got a long lens on because I don't want to get too close to them and interrupt them. I don't want them to go. It's just too good to have them leave because I've spooked them. So again, keep your distance, find out a way to get this shot. The backlight's good, so I'm on a good tripod, so I can actually I don't have to worry about a cable release. I've got enough speed, enough light to work it here, but I'm careful with my exposure because I've got a really dark animal and backlight. I want to make sure I get it all. And so, just come in and look and check. I've got my highlights setting on my LED readout here on the back, my screen. And so if anything gets blown out, I'm seeing it instantly and I can make the changes. But for the most part, everything's working fine and the backlight is just stunning. Fantastic, fantastic. Luck, luck, luck. F8 and be there. Gorgeous, just gorgeous. Photographing herds anywhere on the planet, it doesn't matter where. Zebras in Africa, bison in South Dakota. There are similarities that are things to pay attention to. We are here now because they are calving. It's a great time to be here. The herd is collectively together, and you're going to find that's true no matter where you go. Mommies and babies want to stay close together, so it's a great time to plan to be there then. But you always have to be careful when you're photographing wildlife like this. I had seen this particular herd marching from one side of a ridge en route to another. So they were in front of me, moving this way. So I was able to get that parallel shot which showed the length and the size of the herd in their movement. And then after they passed and they started going down the hill on the other side, I ran down with my long lens to try to get more interaction shots of them going a different direction. So my goodness, I was able to get all kinds of different action and views of the animal as they moved from one side to another. That's a great thing to do. One of the other tricks, if you have time to plan and you know animals' particular routes, no matter where you are, it could be a single animal, it could be a herd of animals, is to use a remote triggering device or put yourself in a spot where you can get a camera where when the herd comes by, you don't have to be there for safety reasons, but you can bury a camera. You can set it on a game trail, and as the animals come by, either triggered through radio control or through infrared beams, they take their own picture, you get a really unique image. One of my favorites is one that I took years ago from a very, very low position of a bison stampede. And it made a fabulous shot, and it's a perspective that you cannot get by yourself because you would put yourself in great harm. So you always have to be aware of where the animal is. I got closer to them as they were moving away from me as opposed to getting close to them as they were coming towards me. So not only for your safety, but for the safety of the animals as well. Be careful where you're shooting and just think, use common sense, be safe, be a good example for other photographers and people watching photographers work. Well, we got a wonderful herd of bison here, probably, 20, 30 animals, and they're calving and they're crossing the road. And I stopped here simply because what's nice is that there's a hill. They're kind of in the valley and there's a hill. And this hill is fantastic because what the hill is doing is, as opposed to seeing the bison, we've got a sky that's flat and boring. So, but the hill goes up, so I've got a natural backdrop. And it makes it perfect to give me just bison against the backdrop. And it's wonderful, and as well as they're migrating here, and as they're moving across the road, it's a wonderful opportunity, again, as a backdrop. The road actually is serving a backdrop. These are wild bison, free-range bison. But what's going to happen now is I'm going to get this shot of a calf running across the road, which is going to really separate him here. So, you know, it's one of these things, do you want to keep a road in the shot or not? But this is the natural range for these guys crossing the road. And so I am just in a perfect spot with a long lens to get them as they're moving across this hill and getting shots of them right in the middle of the road. Now, there's a little guy running now. Let's get him. That's the great thing about the prairie, folks, is that you can see everything just happening right before your eyes, and you don't have to worry about being so terribly close to everything. We'll be able to get close to these guys, but right now this is fantastic. Now, there's a calf about to cross the road. Gonna see if we can get him. Now here's the key, you know, I mean, he's being blocked by other bison, but right, 1, 2, boom, there he is. We got him, and now they're separated, perfect. So in other words, I'm getting shots of the bison not being back to back. I'm getting them so they're separate so I can see through them, and it defines the animal much better. So as the bison are going across the road now, I'm using an old style 600 millimeter. It's one that I've had for 20 years. And there's no reason for me to upgrade to something else and bringing it on this particular trip, because these animals are so far in the distance that I've got plenty of time to sit and focus. I'm not having to worry about them coming and going. They're going laterally across my frame. And so I'm using manual focus, and I'm on manual exposure because I'm adjusting to the changing light. We had some sun, but now it's kind of all moved into a bright overcast, which, to tell you the truth, for the time of the day that I'm here now, it's the perfect light. And so I'm just going to keep panning, watching them, getting shots of these little guys keeping up with their moms. We've got the herd now has almost crossed the road, which is nice because now I've got shots of them in a setting that's completely wild, but yet we've been able to integrate man in the road as they cross the road, which, you know, now you've got the choice. You can either use that kind of a shot or you can not use that kind of a shot, so it's perfect. Now they're all moving to the other side of the road, and I'm able to get another one. Here's one running. I'm going to grab him if I can get him. He's anxious to get to his group. And that makes a better shot. He's even closer, and they're running together. And there's something about their gait that is very different than just walking. So they are boogieing. Fantastic. And now he's gone solo. Fantastic. That's the kind of stuff you hope for. Something just comes running by like that, and you're able to get it. The other thing about a long lens, this particular herd here, and there's several of them here in Custer State Park, rarely are they all together at the same time, except during the roundup, what happens in October. So I've got a small herd. So one of the ways that I can make this herd look bigger is the compression of a long lens, because it takes everything and it brings it in closer together. So if I can find a small grouping, even if it's only 20 animals, but I can use a long lens to compress it, it gives the illusion and the visual feel that there's a lot more there because we've compressed the scene. It's another one of the values of having a long lens for something like this when you're shooting so far in the distance. So we've got here a fabulous situation. It's been raining for the longest time with the sun trying to break on the other side. We just came across a herd here that is walking across this open prairie. I'm on a slightly elevated spot so I can see them very clearly. We've got a fantastic rainbow that's going over the entire herd. And all I'm trying to do is get to a spot to where the herd seems evenly distributed, and I can get shots of the herd, and I'm bringing the herd to the bottom of my frame because, let's face it, the bison in the field across the prairie here are one thing, but the rainbow brings another element to it. So I'm bringing my bottom of my frame right up to the feet of the bison, and I'm playing off the rainbow, and I'm underexposing a little bit so the rainbow really pops. This is a fantastic prairie shot. I'm getting rainbow from end to end and the bison herd underneath it. This is the kind of stuff you hope will happen. Fantastic. That's just some hot stuff. Very nice. You know, sometimes you stick your head out there in that muddy water and there's a clean river running right next to it and you hit gold. You know, you got to go out. When it's ugly, cool things can happen. Suddenly a bison just ran across the road, and it was a great opportunity, one, to get a wildlife shot, but mainly he was by himself and he wasn't running away, and it was close to us. And the unique thing is every once in a while when something like that happens, it wasn't a hill where there was debris or erratics behind him. It was a nice, clean ridge. And so immediately, the concept of silhouette popped out in my mind. But as he stood there and as I stood up, I could still see a little bit of the ground behind him. And, so it wasn't a clean silhouette. I could still see the ground behind him, but I knew if I laid down, I could make it a silhouette. And so, boy, he was standing there. I was close enough I could stay close to the vehicle. I just laid down and boom, immediately this bison became a perfect silhouette against a great sky that was wonderfully in blue. And I was able to play with it. And, you start thinking, okay, well, geez, he's not moving, he's posing, this is great, may as well milk this. So horizontals, verticals, come in close, pull back, all of these things. And you started to notice that when he went into a full profile, where his head was completely flat like this, it was an okay shot. It was a wonderful bison portrait, but it was two-dimensional. But the minute he turned his head like this and brought his head towards us, it became a three-dimensional shot. So think of those things when you're out. Things will change, and especially with wildlife, a bison is beautiful and as prominent and as majestic as it can be. It can also look a lot like a cow. And so until it does something, until any wildlife does something, the interest is not nearly as compelling. And there was a particular point in time after I was able to get a few shots of him when I was lying on the ground. Okay, we've got that. I've done the pullbacks, the up close, the side, the vertical, the horizontal. Why not try to get a little bit more in front of him now? So I just went out to the street, and then I lied in the street, so I was more faced on with him. And the same issue took place. When he looked at me like this, it's two-dimensional, but when he turned his head to the side, it became three-dimensional. It was more interesting. And then when he did that, he tried to scratch himself with his back leg. Boom, there's my shot. Something happened. It wasn't just a cow standing in the middle of a pasture. It was a bison in the middle of the prairie doing what he does. We're out in the Black Hills of South Dakota on this famed road known as the Needles Highway. It's just littered when you get up to the upper elevations of these incredible geological fingers that give it the name of the Needles. It's a great place to come up and photograph. When you come up here, there's a variety of ways that you can shoot in the Black Hills. And what you see I've got on here right now is a 600. And the 600 is something that's going to get me really close. But at the same time, if I wanted to see all of this, I could use a wide angle lens. So what I'm going to get right now is a photograph of a 600 millimeter, which is going to do what? It's going to get me really close to one of these formations. And I'm going to be able to pinpoint certain spots, certain peaks if I want to. If I could spot a rock climber, I could get a rock climber. If I could see a mountain sheep, I could get a mountain sheep. As opposed to the wide angle, which when I come up, I wouldn't see them. They'd be too far off. I'd get an expansive view. So that's kind of the way this works. And so the 600 millimeter that I've got on here now is a fixed focused 600 millimeter. In other words, it's not a zoom. I can't go back and forth. So I'm set with what I have. It's a big piece of glass, so I have to have it on a tripod. The other lenses, I don't necessarily have to. There's a general rule of thumb with lenses and using tripods. Never handhold a camera with a lens of 600 at a focal length less than the speed of your shutter speed. So in other words, if I have a 600 millimeter on, I need at least be at a 600 millimeter, and I tend as a safety device to double that to make sure there's no camera shake. To eliminate camera shake, you put it on sticks and you get it on a tripod head. That's the reason you do it. If I have a 20 millimeter lens on here, I could really, if I'm still, handhold that at 20th of a second and not have to worry about camera shake. So you've got these differences. So right now with the 600, the big glass, that's why I've got this on here. And I'm going to stick with that because it's secured my camera. There'll be no camera shake. And then we're going to move back and we're going to get some wider angle shots to kind of show more of expansiveness here, and we'll go from there. Also with the 600, if you look at this big piece of glass, you say, well, I don't have a bazooka. Well, if you have a 300, then you can get a 2x teleconverter or a 1.4 teleconverter, which basically doubles your 300, making it a 600. And then you've got that focal length that's here. The downside of it is that most of these teleconverters diminish the amount of light coming into the lens, and oftentimes they have a tendency to diminish the quality and clarity that you get with such a lens. So that's one of the compromises. That's why a fixed focus 600 for me is the way to go. But if you don't have that, you want to get a teleconverter, it's a way to pump up your 300 millimeter to double its focal length. So let's get a shot. So as you can see, my bazooka's gone. And what I've got here now is one of my favorite lenses. It isn't a fast 300 millimeter. This is actually a zoom lens. So going away from the fixed focused 600, which is one of my favorite pieces of glass because it's so sharp. I'm moving to a travel lens that I use, and it's a zoom lens. This particular one is a 28 to 300. My goodness, 28 millimeter to a 300 millimeter. So you see, I've still got it on the sticks here. It's a very small portable lens, but it's not a fast lens. That's why it doesn't look so huge. You know, the faster the lens, the bigger the glass. So this one is easy for me to travel with anywhere in the world and take with me because it's easy and it's compact, and I've got 28 to 300 within that focal length. So I'm here now, the light's diminished, the wind has picked up. I had the sticks here from shots I was taking with the 600. So I decided to go ahead and keep it here with the 300 on because I'm gonna go for a little bit more depth of field now, which means I want it to be still again so I don't have any camera shake. So that enables me to do it by having it on the sticks. Now you can notice too, I've changed my tripod head. The Wimberley designed tripod head, which is designed for your long, big focal length lenses, isn't necessary for this, and it's more difficult to put on a camera body on that particular tripod head than it is here. So that's the reason for the switch. So we'll get a shot now with the 300, and you'll notice it's not nearly as close as the 600, but it still gives me more of a pinpoint area of the tops of my peaks as opposed to seeing the valley that's below it. So let's get a shot of that. One of the great things about using this particular, I kind of call it my travel lens, my travel telephoto lens, because it goes from that 28 to 300. And I love that because I can go from that compression that I need to get from a large lens to all the way down to a 28 millimeter. It's fabulous. But I love being able to get it off the sticks. And so now I get the same scene in the needles, and I'm not going to be using the 300 millimeter, so I can take it off the tripod. So I'm going to start some shots now. There's a view now where I can pull back even more, and I've got the 105 millimeter on the zoom now, and I can hand hold it because if I'm hand holding it, all I've got to be is at like 250th of a second. I'm actually going to stick at 500th of a second because I can hand hold the camera now and not have to worry about camera shake. And that's so important, to not waste your time, your money, and your efforts getting someplace and using a shutter speed less than the focal length of your lens, which enables shake while you're hand holding it. So just really be very aware of that because that's the big killer for most people in their photographs. The other thing is I can move around. I can change my position now, and I'm not married to having that tripod. And I can zoom in, I can zoom out. It's the beauty of a zoom. And this one goes all the way out to a 28 millimeter. And by moving around, if you get a tree that's in your way, like that one was, I can move over here. I'm going to pull back now. Now I'm seeing more of the needles. That works really well. And see, now I'm at 50th in my millimeter, 50 millimeter. And so now I'm even wider. So I'm getting wide. So let's go all the way to 28 and see what happens to 28. Now the 28 is getting almost too wide for me here. And what happens is the wide is bringing in more information than I want. So it's starting to damage my shot in this spot. Two reasons why. One, my light is diminished. I've got a white sky kind of behind as opposed to a blue sky behind the needles. The more sky I bring into the shot, the wider it gets. And if you remember, one of the basic things in photography, your eye goes to one of two places, either the sharpest or the brightest spot first. So if I start including more and more sky as I get wider and wider, my eye's going to go to the sky before it's going to go to the needles. I don't want that. But the same problem I have is that there's been a lot of forest clearing in the foreground. So if I decide to eliminate the sky and I start pointing my camera down to eliminate the sky when I go wide, I start bringing in all of this stuff. So you lose both ways. The value of the zoom. You can find that spot, that perfect medium where you've eliminated the bright, you've eliminated the scarring on the forest floor here, and you've got your shot. But let me take a shot anyway so you can see what I'm talking about. All right, sun's coming out a little bit now. I've just changed to another zoom. This particular zoom is probably my favorite piece of glass because it's the 14 to 28. And I absolutely, 1424, excuse me. I love this lens for a couple of reasons. One, it's razor sharp. And photographers have that tendency to get lenses that they're really favorite with. And plus, I tend to see my scenes, my vision tends to happen in two focal lengths. It's either a 300 or it's a 14, and that's just the way it is. I like the way those lenses portray the world for me. And so photographers tend to do that. They gravitate towards certain focal lengths to interpret things the way they choose to interpret them. Now, the scene that we've got here, as I mentioned earlier, is when you go too wide here, it doesn't work all that well. There's just too much stuff here. The sky has not cleared yet. I don't have crystal blue sky. I don't even have a lot of textures in the clouds that would allow me to go ahead and say, well, if I put a neutral density filter on here, it would allow me to have some textures bring it out. Right now, it's kind of flat and poo-pooed out. It happens, that's just the way it is. But I want to make sure I get a chance to show you what these focal lengths can do while we're here. So let's go ahead and I'm going to start with the 24 millimeter and give you an idea of what a 24 will look like in this scene. And of course, the problem that I've got is that all this debris that's in the bottom is really contaminating the shot. So that was the 24. Now look what happens when I go to the 14. Now my scene, now the needles way in the background have happened to go so far away that you can't even really define them as being the needles formations. So it's really important that you choose a focal length to be able to interpret accurately what it is you're seeing. Right now, these look like any other kind of unusual peak as opposed to when I was shooting with the 300 and the 200 millimeters, they were clearly defined as being the needles. So the focal length does matter, you know, not only from a dramatic standpoint, but from an informational standpoint as well. So choose the right focal length to bring home the point that you're trying to say. The light's getting worse. It happens. So what do you do now? Well, I've got this wonderful little lens that I carry in my bag because it has this kind of avant-garde feel to it that I like to pull out every once in a while. And so sometimes when light gets bad, this makes the image better. It's the Lens Baby. And this particular one is the Composer model. And what it does is it allows me to be able to throw certain areas of the shot out of focus wherever I want to by simply tilting the lens back and forth, up and down. And what I typically do is I'll put it on, I grab it like this, because a lot of people say that's a hard lens to use. I'll tell you an easy trick to make this really easy to use. I put it on, I put my hands over it like this so I keep it really straight. And from that point, I'm starting off. I think a lot of people automatically come in and they turn it way one side, way the other side, and things are so out of focus then they think, I can't find any focus points that are sharp here. That's not how I approach it. Come at it very, very straight, and I can take this scene now and I've got a tree in the foreground, a tree in the background, and then the needles, which are very, very far in the distance. This particular Lens Baby lens is probably the equivalent to like maybe a 50 to an 80 millimeter. So it's not wide, it's small, looks like it'd be wide, but it's not. But it's not a telephoto either. But it allows me to get close enough to the needles to where the needles are identified as the needles' geologic formation here in the Black Hills. But what it's gonna do is it's gonna throw that tree out of focus, and it's gonna throw that tree out of focus, but it's gonna keep the needles in focus. So remember, again, bad light, trying to find a way to make this more creative shot, an interesting shot, your eye goes to the brightest and the sharpest spots, remember? So what we're gonna do is let the needles be the sharpest spots. By these things being out of focus, our eyes are gonna go right to the needles, which is right where I wanna direct you to. So let's take a shot of that and see how that looks. That looks fabulous through the viewfinder. It's a nice little tool. Heading home. Both a good thing and a bad thing, isn't it? It's one of these things, you know, that all good shoots come to an end, and am I satiated with getting images? No. Am I satisfied with what I got? Yes. And coming out and taking those trips and keeping the mind open to all of the various opportunities that you get is always such a treat. And the wildlife here in Custer was absolutely perfect, dynamic. Got the park to myself. We're here in early spring as the trip was planned, and we were able to nail it. No crowds, no people. Things are still changing, grass is still turning green, but it was a great time to be out here. So we'll pack things up, we'll head home, we'll start the edit, and then we'll start planning the next trip.